Today on Leaf by Leaf, Darconville's Cat by Alexander Theroux. This will be a review in two parts. The first, this part, my spoiler-free review of Darconville's Cat, and the second part, a ramble through the periphery of my reading notes, which will assume that viewers have read the book or do not care about spoilers. Oh, this is not Spellvexit. This is Socks. Early in William Gass's 30-year distillation of a novel, The Tunnel, the character Herr Kohler says, "But words, to be sincere, are what we wretched writers are." Likewise, in William Gaddis's landscape-shifting debut novel, The Recognitions, we get, what is it they want from a man that they didn't get from his work? What do they expect? What is there left of him when he's done his work? What's any artist but the dregs of his work, the human shambles that follows it around? And very late in Alexander Theroux's monolithic Darconville's Cat, we are told, but memory had its birthplace in those words, not the other way round. For creation is to memory what resurrection is to death, reversing pain to send it back again, to ask of the momentarily incomplete idiom of that which prompted it, that feeble analog called reality, overflowing itself in every direction. What is meant in the terrible paradox, at the heart of that truth which has two forms, each of them indisputable, yet each antagonistic to the other, loving and hating. By extension then, if words are what matter most, then Theroux in Darconville's Cat has given us perhaps the paramount example of writing from that stance. Here's a sampling of the word horde for your pleasure. On the heels of that logophilia, would-be readers may be left wondering if the book is accessible at all. Let me assure you, as with all of Theroux's work, the story is so rich with context that I will go so far as to say that even if you skip words you don't immediately recognize, this will in no way hinder comprehension, though it will rob you of much pleasure to be had. That's my answer. But of course, when the character Mrs. Dottipole asks Darconville if she will need a dictionary in order to read his book, he responds with, "It depends on how much you used your dictionary before you read it." A lot of Latin and Greek compounds are actually latent in a lot of our minds. We just don't realize it. Segments like hyper, hypna, hypno, hypo, peri, homo, anti, logo, pathic, and file are familiar to us. Consulting a general audience book like English Words from Latin and Greek Elements by Donald M. Ayers would be a great way to expand your own word hoard and thus enhance your vocabulary and respond to what I will call not Theroux's challenge, but Theroux's invitation. In the special review of contemporary fiction issue that featured Theroux, his professor and friend from the University of Virginia, Martin C. Battiston, points out in his essay how much fun it was to keep dictionaries handy and look up these words and experience the revelation of just how precisely they are employed. The feeling is sort of like admiring pyrotechnics that rain down fortune cookies, inside of which are little strips of paper that have writing on them that accords with something we already knew intuitively. There are three principal characters in Darconville's Cat and two secondary agents. Well, really there are three secondary agents, and those who have read it will know what I'm talking about. Alaric Darconville, the schoolmaster who always wore black and had to fight not to notice everything. A proud, hyper-educated Bostonian who has taken a job at an all-girls college in Quincyburg, Virginia. It's sort of his island of Patmos, where he plans to dedicate all of his time outside of the classroom to work on writing his grimoire book of angelology called Rumpopulorum. He is insurrect, courteous, liturgical, and 29 years old. Isabel Rawsthorne, an 18-year-old freshman at the Quincyburg campus from the poor backwoods town of Fox's Mount. With a drunkard for a mother and an absent father, she will instantly become the object of Darconville's obsession and desire and intense love. Like the couples in An Adultery and Laura Warholic, the two could not be more dreadfully mismatched. Govert Vanderslang, Isabel's mysterious neighbor and suspected amour, whom we never meet. Hypsipyle Poor, another beautiful student who makes many unrequited passes at Darconville and acts as a gambit of miscommunication between the salient couple. And there is perhaps the arch-sinister villain of all of literature, the abominable, reprehensible, nauseating, misogynist Dr. Abel Crucifer, who makes Minot Warholic look like Mr. Rogers. Save for the intensity introduced with Dr. Crucifer, the love romance between Darconville and Isabel plays out like many a love romance, and is, in fact, based on real people, events, and situations. Just as Isabel tells Darconville late in the book through a tape recording to do your worst, so, allegedly, Rawsthorne's real-life counterpart, whose name appears in an acrostic to the section A Promise Fulfilled, goaded Theroux himself to do his worst. The result? This novel. Labels like maximalism, encyclopedism, and Menippean satire will come to mind for a deft, scholarly treatment of where Darconville's Cat finds its place within this sea of labels. Please delight in the paper Do Your Worst, Maximalism and Intertextuality in Alexander Theroux's Darconville's Cat by Sam Endrigkeit. He makes compelling arguments in favor of the book's use of oversaturation and carnivalism. The paper also surveys two list chapters that appear in Darconville's Cat, the Misogynist's Library and the Unholy Litany, teasing out and differentiating between real books and real historical people, those that are possibly made up, and then those that are from fiction. This highlights one of the main things that paper drives home, and that's the relentless intertextuality of Darconville's Cat, and a testament to Theroux's deliberate craftsmanship and inventive imagination. To further situate Theroux in general, with distinctions that run between the lines through Pynchon and Sorrentino, the lines that run through Djuna Barnes and Baron Corvo, and the lines that run through Norman Mailer and John Updike. Please be sure to check out Stephen Moore's upcoming monograph, Alexander Theroux, A Fan's Notes. So much has been said in this area that I will only say that yes, it is a big, thick, dense, maximalist, encyclopedic, Menippean novel that not only stretches language beyond its limits, not only subsumes the entire Near East and Western literary traditions, beginning with Gilgamesh, not only engages with genre and form and literary device to rival that of Joyce's Ulysses, not only presents a villain that casts a shadow over Melville's peg-legged Ahab, though Crucifer is, shall we say, without peg, but also presents a compelling narrative, overflowing with the spectrum of human emotion, real laughter, a knack for vivid description, clear plotting, and an ending that will continue to reverberate long after the book is closed. The book is comprised of 100 chapters in Roman numerals, just like the total cantos of Dante's Commedia. In this way, it can roughly be split into 3 sections from Darconville's shifting perspective. Virginia, corresponding to hell, Cambridge, corresponding to purgatory, and Venice, corresponding to paradise, with Isabel being a sort of refracted Beatrice, and the deterioration of Darconville's physical being and enlightenment of his soul inversely proportionate to the trajectory of Dante's pilgrimage. Within these chapters, Theroux makes use of every single element of the book to adorn the prose with Baroque architecture and postmodern inventiveness. In one chapter, Professor Darconville gives a student an A for her paper, Three Wogs, my favorite novel. In another chapter, we get an unanswered riddle. For what it's worth, I believe the answer to be Snword. Characters are given names like Annabelle Lee Jinx, Shrimpy Devane, Sistine Chapelle, which is actually a clever nod to Frederick Roef's Hadrian VII, and Quirt Yui Op, which is the entire first row of an English keyboard split into 3 segments. The chapter, What is One Picture Worth, is composed of exactly 1,000 words. Theroux's previously published fable, Master Snickup's Cloak, is interjected into Darconville's Cat, but without the muted grotesquerie of Brian Froud's illustrations. And the chapter Heroic Couplet takes the form of a dramatic dialogue in heroic couplets to render a much anticipated confrontation between Darconville and Isabel, complete with 2 virgin maiden characters listening and watching just beyond the room. We have to remember that Theroux is never far from Chaucer and Shakespeare and the Jacobians. As with his other work, aphorisms abound. The writer is the Ponce who introduces can to ought. Truth indeed was fabulous, and men, he'd always thought, best knew himself by fable. Faculty meetings are held whenever the need to show off is combined with the imperative of accomplishing nothing. Writing, he'd come to see, was the spiritual disease of which it considered itself to be the cure. This is actually also a play on Krauss about psychology or psychoanalysis. I want to be what I was when I wanted to be what I am now. A real gambler always returns the money he's won. The torch casts no light upon its base. Art creates the Eden where Adam and Eve eat the serpent. Lists are in abundance and often hilarious, such as the Quincyburg shops and slogans, the graded papers, and of course then there is the notorious misogynist library and the unholy litany. The venomous Why Don't You list chapter features 11 pages of Dr. Crucifer's horrible, violent ideas for what Darconville should do to Isabel. It should be noted that once again, the saturation of language and absurdism of content bolster the Menippean satire and offer a cartoonish overtone to what, taken isolated as constituent parts, should be abhorrent. What impressed me most about this section was, again, the fecundity of imagination and a host of verbs I have never seen before, mostly used transitively to great effect. Here's a wall of them for your pleasure. So much has been made about Dr. Crucifer and his misogyny that this long out of print book has carried an unfair stigma. On the one hand, that is a testament to the power of language, as Crucifer is all rhetoric and no action. Yet, an ultra-sexually violent book like Hurricane Season is up for the Booker. This is not to knock Hurricane Season. I haven't read it yet. Only to show a point between our capricious responses to words versus deeds in fiction. It is plain to everyone who reads Darconville's Cat all the way through that Crucifer is a dark, comic invention that the book in no way approves or advocates. Though the research and artistry that went into this character is substantial, the characterization aggrandizes Milton's Satan and Goethe's Mephistopheles in the same way that the book apes the denizens of rural Virginia and pedants from academia. Darconville himself, whom many agree is essentially a mouthpiece for Theroux, explicitly expresses bewilderment at how anyone could hate women. Where Dr. Crucifer is different from the usual satirical character, however, is that he overcomes Darconville. The intellectual hero and scathing social critic and proud Catholic has met his match. in this black apparition living in the upper rooms of Adam's house on the Harvard campus. Once Crucifer enters the narrative, after foreshadowing that appropriates the best of Gothic literature, his hideous voice takes over. Darconville grows increasingly silent and physically distressed, but resists Crucifer's acidic diatribes. Only after becoming seriously ill and drugged and bedridden in Crucifer's chambers does Darconville buy into the plan to kill Isabel based on a perverse philosophy. We will remember that the explicateur that prefaces the book starts off with, "This is a story of murder." But even then, the misogyny is never endorsed or validated, and Darconville's tragic heroism ultimately prevails. In short, it seems to me that the book goes out of its way to announce itself as purposefully overwrought satire in order to achieve a higher level of meaning than the ostensible text. It is not a book of misogyny then, no. It is a book about love and hate, and uses metaphors to represent the apex of each, or perhaps the apex of love and the nadir of hate. In fact, the essays Love and Hate were written before any of the rest of the book. And when the essay Love is delivered, it is not from the narrator, but from Darconville himself. Likewise, when the hate essay is rendered, it's spoken by Crucifer and not the narrator. As the preface tells us, loving and hating are the oldest fingerprints of man. The conception then in this novel is that love and hate are a Janus of emotions, and thus we find this yin and yang pattern throughout. Love, wrote Darconville, is as rare as the emotion of hate. They bear a strange complementarity. Some 400 pages later, we get hate, said Dr. Crucifer, is love's other face. They are complements, not opposites. In the love essay, we get determination through evil is an anagram for I mean to rend it through love. And in the hate essay, we get the heart's desire is an anagram for hate strides here. Later, in Venice, we are told of the doctor who attends to Darconville patiently, while the young man's extraordinary talk flowed on, talk that scaled the heavens and ransacked the earth. Talk in which memories of a curious past mingled preposterously with doctrines of art, comic mimicries, and prevaricating theories about love and hate. That is Darconville's cat. It has been noted that the book parallels Proust in that it all builds up to a climactic moment when the writer-author has an epiphany about their vocation in life, basically to write about everything that has happened. This moment in Darconville's cat has a parallel in Moby Dick. How then, with me writing of this Leviathan, unconsciously my chirography expands into placard capitals. Give me a condor's quill. Give me Vesuvius's crater for an inkstand. Friends, hold my arms, for in the mere act of penning my thoughts of this Leviathan, they weary me. Not to be outdone by any writer, living or dead, Theroux has Darconville declaim. Quire me some paper, shear me a sheep for vellum, nail me out a desk with the timber of redwoods, a quill pluperfect shoots from the sky to occupy my hand. Sound me the Dorian mode, I am alive, O sunset, come back from the dead, and from thy crucible dost thou call me forth even as I am. All is in movement, there are angels come to bandage the wounded angels of battle and bend to lift me from the darkness of light. Beau saisons, silence is full of execution, and intuition and desire lie undestroyed. I will squeeze secrets through the tips of my fingers. I will bring noses to window panes. I am still Darconville, master of my fate, captain of my soul. In contrast to that exuberance, earlier on in Quincyburg, while in a writing slump, we are told, it was wounding not to be able to write easily, upgathering what of life seemed barren without the expression of it. Art, therefore, is the expression which gives life to memory, which is barren before its future memorialization. That is a seeming anachronism which would have pleased Oscar Wilde. But Theroux, in his aphoristic mode, gives more nuance to the classical Hippocratic quip about the longevity of art. We must free what we are in time from memory and live toward a future which, second upon second, made memory irrelevant even if it increased its size. Darconville, in the end, takes up the Black Disaster, the name for his lifelong writing implement, and both exorcises his demons and breathes life into his own barren memories. He thus amends both Milton and Proust. The only true paradise for us is the paradise we could lose. Welcome to a ramble through the periphery of my reading notes for Darconville's Cat. This is the first time I've ever done a sort of bull session like this, but my reading of the book just sort of warranted it. There's so much to talk about that I could go on making videos of it over and over. But I wanted to, of course, get a tighter, more concise review video out there, especially for those who haven't read it. So this is just going to be me thumbing through the book I read. I bought this used for like $35. It was already falling apart by the time I get it. In case you haven't noticed, I'm neurotic about the condition of my books. When I read them, I don't ever even open them all the way. But I did acquire a very good hardcover, so I'm really excited about that. The jacket is intact and great. One thing to note about the paperback that I didn't realize until I was reading Stephen Moore's book is that it actually contains a little bit more. When Henry Holt published this, Theroux added to it. For those of you who are acquainted with Theroux, you'll know that that's sort of his MO. I would like to point out that I'm wearing my Aesthetically Adventurous t-shirt from Rain Taxi Review of Books. Go pick one up. Better yet, if you haven't read or subscribed to Rain Taxi, I highly recommend it. This is an outstanding source of literature. They believe in the book review as an art form, and they believe that print matters. In fact, they have a nice tote that has that belief that print matters on it. So there's still a print edition as well as the online edition. Fantastic reviews, and they've been around for a very long time. Very, very nice people who care deeply about literature. Also, I would like to plug Better Than Food books. Sorry, I keep doing that. It may be Better Than Feud, but maybe not Family Feud, because Steve Harvey's hilarious, and I really like Family Food. Family Food, I'm all over the place now. Okay, I really did just take a layer of skin off of my lips and tongue. But anyway, that's his mug, in case you didn't realize. Better Than Food, of course, is a skeleton because the books are so good, he hasn't had food in quite a long time. Anyway, it's a great channel. He's a really nice guy, and he's covered a wide array of stuff. And the quality, his production quality is outstanding. So the first thing, obviously the title, Darconville's Cat, which has its most immediate meaning in Spellvexit, who is his grandmother's cat from Italy. But then also, as different people have pointed out, cat is also a symbol for God. Darconville, when he was a young boy, he drew a picture of God, and it resembled a cat. It's a symbol for Isabel herself. That comes up all over the place in this novel. But if we think about the cat as a symbol of both Spellvexit, the actual feline, and Isabel, in the novel, they both disappear from his life right at about the same time. And at the very end, there's that like Blakean visionary moment where he says, my cat, something was coming toward him. But then also he's summoning back the memory of Isabel from early on as he's penning this book that we have. So that made me think about the title of a thought exercise from quantum mechanics that I'm sure everyone has heard of, Schrodinger's cat. So Darconville's cat, Schrodinger's cat, they seem to be isomorphic to me, at least as far as the name, Darconville, Schrodinger, whatever. What's interesting about Schrodinger's cat is that the whole thought experiment is set up such to prove what's called superimposition, which means that the cat in that box is both dead and alive. In the same way, because he's possessing Isabel and their story and so on by memory, the memory of someone is in a way a superimposition of that someone being both dead and alive. That first line of the story proper, Darconville, the schoolmaster, always wore black. I'll never forget that. That's such a great, memorable opening line. It's like, call me Ishmael. Darconville, the schoolmaster, always wore black. You just won't forget it. And then the next paragraph opens with, he was alone. And this makes me think of Edgar Allan Poe's poem, Alone. He had always been apart from everyone else. He talks about in the poem how he couldn't bring his pleasures from a common spring, or something like that. But it really accords with the Darconville character and Theroux himself. He's alone. No one is like him. How about that part where he says, a little boy whose earliest memory was of trying to pick up pieces of moonlight that had fallen through the window onto his bed. That's like something from Anne Carson. It's beautiful. One of the reasons I really took to this book, for example, it took me about 4 weeks to read William Gass's The Tunnel. It took me a solid 3 weeks of exclusive reading of Laura Warholic. But I read this, admittedly exclusively, and a lot of hours. But I read this in 7 days, in a week. I could not put it down, and I ended up taking time off of work just to spend the day reading it. And one of the reasons is because it paints this picture of the atmosphere and the feeling of being in rural Virginia, in southwest, in southern Virginia. And I spent half of my life in that area. I've been to Charlottesville many times. Though I never lived in any mountain towns like Fox's Mount, I've been through those countless times in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And then likewise, later on, when we get the Boston / Cambridge section, yeah, I've been to Boston and Cambridge a bunch of times. Never lived there like I have Virginia, but I've spent time walking around Harvard. He so describes these people and this area, and I know these people, and I know this area. So part of that, you know, I was really connecting with it because of all of my own memories and childhood intertwined within these things. But it can be so hilarious, such as this. It was a place that liked its coffee black, its flapjacks dry, its adjectives few, its cheeses hard, its visits short, its melodies whistleable, and its dreams in black and white. Preferably the latter. Now that's an unfortunate point about the racism that is hard to even laugh at, because it is prevalent and very sad. He also talks about the way that people in Virginia revere and worship Saturdays, and it could not be any closer to the truth. I love what he says to the girls in his class, where he says, "Use," said Darconville, "your definitionary. It's one of the last few pleasures left in life." Oh yeah, he gives us, you know, along with his word hoard, he also must give us the longest word in literature, which I can't even begin to pronounce, but it is a real thing. It's not something he made up. This is from Aristophanes' comedy called Assemblywomen, and it's the word is for a fictional dish of food. It is the longest Greek word at 182 letters and 78 syllables. The first chapter we get about his writing is entitled "Sparks from My Anvil," and it's in quotes. I'm sure that comes from something. I'd fallen asleep on the job, didn't look that up. That's a great way of putting it, sparks from my anvil. And he says, words, they seem his only experience, his only sophistications. And yet what were they? Merciless little creatures crowding about and eager for command, each with its own physical character, an ancestry, an expectation of life, and a hope of posterity. It's amazing. Just this visual of words when an author is deep in it and writing, seeing sparks from an anvil. That's so beautiful. And then seeing them as these creatures that are crowding in upon him and begging to be given expression. The tragedy of writing was that its hiding place was its habitat, those secret and inaccessible desert places we seek to violate, like tombs, for miracles we'd have but can only blaspheme in the touching. The essay on love is so well done. He talks about how it's as rare as the emotion of hate. They're extreme antipodes with each other, but because of that, this strange complementarity. Free will, we couldn't truly love if we couldn't also hate. And he sets up the idea of love versus the reality of love. And what that is basically stasis versus kinesis. Man loves in order to live in another, a life missing in himself. How about this little nod to Lolita? I don't know anybody who doesn't like the opening words of Lolita. But in the love essay, Darconville is saying, love, say the word. How the velarized tongue drops, astonished, to the sigh of a moan-worthy O that comes from low in the throat and trembles into the frail half-bite that closes on it like a kiss. The word is not spoken, it is intoned, proselytizing both the one who breathes it and the one upon whom it is breathed. Here's Darconville against misogyny. Sitting there, turning the pages. Actually, and I should say, these pages come from an essay. I have a video out here about it, Theroux Metaphrasts, and it's his statement on literature and the way he writes. And he has this made-up ancestor, a cardinal, Pierre Christophe Cardinal Theroux Darconville. So he's responding to this same treatise, made up. Mind you, this is all made up. Another testament to Theroux's powerful imagination, but his ancestor wrote this, and there's misogynistic material in it. And Darconville's responding to it. So sitting there, turning the pages, Darconville nevertheless found one particular aspect of the treatise disagreeable. Its misogyny. How, he wondered, could anyone hate women? And he calls women the most beautiful half of the human race. There's a moment where in the Charlottesville chapter where he says, there, the northern part of Virginia begins to detach itself from the southern. That's so true. I grew up hearing rumors about Virginia finally splitting into two states, northern and southern Virginia, because they are so wildly different. Here is that Gothic description leading up to the introduction of Dr. Crucifer that I talked about in my review but didn't read. And I feel compelled to read this. There wasn't a sound inside of Adam's house. One corridor led to another, communicating to ever more and more shadowy rooms. And all in all, it seemed to be one of those places that had been kept, swept, and oiled, but locked up for ages and never to be used again. Gothic shafted windows lit in gray light. There were more exits and entrances, unexpected turnings and angles than Darconville had ever seen, including the many Venetian palazzi he'd known famous for them. He was intrigued. He looked down and listened into stone stairwells that wound down and around as if sunken, desolate dungeons. He started up the stairs, turning from landing to landing, higher and higher, and he came out of the surprising changes of level to the top floor of F staircase. It appeared to be the top floor. At the end of the staith there, however, just out of conventional view, a glimpse of some nearly hidden balusters invited further inspection. It was obviously a BAM, the corners white with the striggles of spiders, of the stair builders of yore. Curious, Darconville kept on up, entering a gallery that seemed contained in the thickness of the wall, an interior space which consisted of another winding ascent, not quite an inclined plane, yet not by any means a regular stair, the edges of stones, neat but primitive, having been suffered to project irregularly to serve for rude steps or a kind of assistance. Through this narrow stairwell, Darconville crept to the top of the house, which was partly ruinous and full of nooks. There was a good deal of hooded furniture and old stuffed chairs, upside down and shrouded with linen antimacassars, turned inside out, all blocking spare rooms reserved for lumber and empty portmanteaux. The dust was formidable. There, branching off at irregular intervals, horizontal galleries, full man height but narrow, went round the whole building, or so it appeared, and received air from circular holes, wheel windows that fell open from their peaks and were held by a chain. There were rooms up there, inhabited rooms. Then came the sound of a sudden step. Another one of his aphorisms: a rough sea leaves a smooth beach. I believe nothing to know everything. The Misogynist Library, I learned from that essay I mentioned by Sam Endrigkeit. I didn't even recognize this at first, but some of these books in here are anagrams for Theroux himself, the authors, such as How to Tell Your Mother from a Wolf by Roland X. Truheeks, which Roland X. Truheeks is an anagram for Alexander Theroux. There's another one, HX Routes, or Roots, and that is an anagram for just Theroux. Another thing I love is that the narrative in this chapter is literally a chapter of books and their authors, and in some cases the dates. But the narrative ends up footnoted. Darconville lifted down this volume, and as he did so, a sheet of paper fluttered out of it. I love this. It's so gothic. He also includes Paul Theroux's Girls at Play, always jousting with his brother there in the Misogynist Library. You know, and really there's a moment, for all of Dr. Crucifer's misogyny, there's this moment in the biography of a eunuch chapter where he says, no human being has ever lived up to the ideal my imagination created out of what I wasn't for what they should be. And it says, Crucifer's eyes as he looked up were savage. I hate them all. Really, it's a misanthropy. It's not just women. They get the brunt of the focus in this book, but really he hates humans. We finally do, in case the reader hasn't suspected it yet or thought of it, we do get this hint that perhaps Crucifer isn't even a real person. It says, perhaps we write less to get a second chance in life than to exorcise the demons peopling our minds. There was no real person named Dr. Crucifer, thought Darconville. I have created him. I'll leave that there. Then this old unholy litany, 20 pages of historical and fictional and made up women, including the Queen Gertrude of Denmark from Hamlet and Rapunzel. He even includes La Belle Dame Saint Merci, Sappho, Anne Hathaway, Shakespeare's wife, not the actress, of course. One cool device or setup that Theroux uses is that he has Darconville play the Day of Wrath portion from Mozart's Requiem, and it's playing while this litany is being spoken by Crucifer, and it's actually a lot of fun. The music will be driving your intonation. What is amazing about this is that it's not merely just a list of these women, but in almost every case, they're complete with their own epitaph. This cracked me up. This is when Darconville knows everything that's going on. He knows about Gilbert, not Govert. He knows they're going to get married, and he's making all these wild plans of what he's going to do. And in the midst of it, he says, then calling in one special telegram to Zutphen Farm, in which it was warned that, short of an interplanetary cataclysm, he'd appear at the forthcoming wedding in the company of Abaddon, the angel of ice, and 60 other apparitions from the abhorred deep. When I read that, in context especially, it's just hilarious. And the hate essay. We talked about the anagrams and the opening line. And in this case, one hates in order to rob from another life, stolen from himself. For hate not only hates what it lacks, but lacks what it loved. During the revenge chapter is when we get one of the linkages of Isabel to a cat. He says, Crucifer says, I mean precisely what are the other ways to skin a cat. That is foreshadowing and setting up the next chapter, the Why Don't You chapter that I talked about in my review. I don't know exactly what was intended here, but obviously the last couple of chapters appear after his Darconville's death, and even describe his death And we're told that the doctor who was attending to him and whom Darconville could never pay, took the black tin box containing the large manuscript. It was suborned by the doctor in the stead of due fee, with a view to adding a penny to his competence. So I don't know if we're to believe that the Black Duchess and the End, these last two chapters, couldn't have been written by Darconville. So perhaps those were written by the doctor and amended to the end of the manuscript. I hope this was worthwhile. Just wanted to sort of ramble on. This was just really an outstanding novel to me. This is high art, the craftsmanship. It's a tragedy that it's out of print.